Okay, I think that's all the practicalities. So let's get on to the treat of the day, our keynote, Dawn Garisch. Dawn is a practicing medical doctor in Cape Town. She's an accomplished writer of non-fiction and at least 6 novels. She's won awards for her poetry and short stories. She's part of the medical humanities movement and founder of the Life Writing Collective, and the link is going in the chat right now. All of you who are interested in writing for wellbeing should take a look there. It's really interesting, a really interesting organisation. I feel honoured to have met Dawn and gleaned excellent advice and suggested reading from her about my own thoughts and ideas. And I've attended courses with the Life Writing Collective, which have been life-changing for me, so highly recommended. I would also recommend Dawn's writing, a couple of things especially. Her part autobiography, Eloquent Body, the link is going in the chat. This explores why we should pay attention to the connection between our bodies and creative selves. And I'd also like to plug her latest novel, Breaking Milk. Here it is, link going in the chat. Which is a probing meditation on motherhood, not only in personal and human terms, but also with regard to our lives as destructive children of the earth. Plugging this particularly, it's published by Caravan Press and is available in the UK. Caravan Press is a brave publisher who publish women's fiction from other countries and really deserves our support, especially us in the UK. Dawn is also in a musical duo with her partner Ian, and I know recently they toured Europe together as a busking duo, which I think is super cool. And I'm looking forward to attending with my husband next weekend, one of their performances. I would describe Dawn as one of those rare people who is really good. She's a good person. So, without going on too much about how honoured we are to have Dawn with us today, here she is to explore uncertainty, anxiety, and creativity. There will be time for questions at the end.
Good morning, everyone. I'm incredibly grateful to be here, partly because this is my life work, and I'm happy to share it at any forum that's available, partly because this gave me an opportunity to revisit the things that I feel really passionate about, and not just to give the same old talk. I've given many talks in my lifetime in the medical humanities, talking about the power of regular creative practice, and it doesn't have to be writing. But I thought I've got to find out something more about this process, something that to me is a bit invisible. You know, looking back at my life, I recognize that there've been, I have healed. This question of invisible mending, what needs to be mended? What is invisible? Let me just share the first slide. Invisible mending. I have had lots of therapy in my lifetime, going through difficult circumstances, but what is really threaded through, there's been something invisible, something intangible, and there's no question that writing has been part of the process of coming to terms with my life. They say that the power of recovering from trauma is to take the part of your life which feels like it's not part of the story of your life. People who can't integrate that into the story of their life, they get post-traumatic disorder, stress disorder. And so what helps you integrate the traumatic elements in your life into the overall picture, the overall story of your life? Writing has definitely helped me do that. But what actually happens if you explore? People sometimes write, I had this problem with my mother and then I forgave her. But what actually happened at that moment of forgiveness? How do we find out that, what is that turning point? That's what I wanted to explore in this question of invisible mending. Can we bring it to the visible, or will it remain hidden from us So making the invisible visible, in 1676, Anton van Leeuwenhoek made a single lens microscope and discovered that the world is full of organisms that we can't see. And it changed the way we thought, it changed the way we saw things. It helped certainly medical practitioners find out what causes disease. And it had an unfortunate consequence in that people started getting really worried about bacteria and the harm that bacteria can do. But the fact remains that only about 95%, or only about 5% of bacteria are harmful. The rest we need for life. So now we've got these detergents that kill all known germs dead, So the unintended consequences of making the invisible visible, negative consequences. But what we're talking about here is not the physical world. We're talking about the psyche. What happens at those moments of change in the psyche? I came across Louis Cozolino in my research for Eloquent Body, and what he says, well, first of all, I have to tell you about this wonderful concept called anxiety management plan, which was coined by James Hollis, who's a psychologist. Some of you will know his work. It's a wonderful concept because he says that from very early age, we put in place things that calm us, because there's lots of things that make us anxious from childhood, from birth. So what do we do to calm ourselves down, to soothe, self-soothe us? And some of those things we put in place are helpful, and some of them are harmful. And unfortunately, if we practice the harmful response to a trigger in the environment that makes us anxious, if we practice that long enough, it becomes a deep groove. It's very hard to change. It's very hard to get out of that groove, to change your behavior. So unfortunately, the things that are harmful to us give us short-term relief. But unfortunately, it's the long-term consequences that we need to consider and see, is there something else that we can put in place to help us manage life, with all its difficulties and the unknown. There's so much unknown in life. How can we calm ourselves down before we've already decided that the worst thing possible is going to happen? And then we can't sleep at night. It's not helpful. So he says an individual's capacity for change is dependent on their ability, first of all, to recognize that you're anxious. There's a stimulus in the world. You feel anxious. We don't even know we're feeling anxious. And we've already drunk a bottle of wine, worked a 12-hour day, gone shopping for things we don't need and can't afford. You know what your thing is. So, and on the surface, it might look like a very helpful thing, like exercise. Obviously exercise is really important, but there are people who compulsively exercise and their knees are crumbling. So you work really hard and it looks like you're achieving all these very important goals, but working too hard, you end up not seeing your family. You end up not having a lunch break. So what are your anxiety management plans? It's a good idea to have a look at that. Are they helpful? Are they harmful? Where they are harmful, can you withhold your usual anxiety management plan and tolerate the consequent increase in anxiety? Because, if you don't go to the thing that calms you quickly, you're going to feel more anxious. Can you tolerate that for long enough for new neural pathways to grow in the brain? And that for long enough, tolerating the anxiety for long enough is where, there's a stimulus reaction. We turn that into a stimulus response because we're opening up the gap between our perception and our response. So that's where creativity is so important, because you can take that terrible feeling and think, where does this come from? Who am I? What can I do about this other than my usual response or reaction? You can take it to the page, the dance floor, the musical instrument. You can take it even to the garden. You can take it to the clay. You can take it to singing. You can make sounds. You can paint a flower, or you can paint how you're feeling. So this is a very powerful reason why we are all born creative, that we have this inbuilt resource that can help us learn how to manage our lives and find out who we are in the process. And how did I get here? And what am I going to do about this? Not only as an individual, but in relationship to other people and to the earth. What's happening at that point where things start turning around through the creative process? So please don't try to read this. I've included this to demonstrate this inquiry. What happens in the creative process that turns things around and changes people's lives? I'm sure all of you in the room, because you're writers, have all experienced this moment where something turns around, something gets settled. You write things down in order to put things down. The circumstances haven't changed, but you have a different relationship with what's bothering you. Or the other thing that's equally important is to build up your reserve, your resources, so that you can grow your foundation. You can ground yourself more effectively so that you have the resilience to go and explore the things that are more difficult. So this is one way of finding out whether things are helpful or harmful. In medicine, we do the double-blind randomized controlled trial, which involves a lot of people and a huge amount of money. And there are potential flaws in the way we select the study group and the control group. So the sociologists came along with the idea of a qualitative research project. And, I teach medical students once a year, third-year medical students, to only have them for a month, and to explore the healing power of writing, which is our tagline for the Life Writing Collective. And one year, the professor of primary healthcare invited me to do a research project with them. They interviewed people who had, this was 2017. They interviewed people who had gone through the Life Writing Collective courses and to find out their subjective response. So it's a subjective way of breaking down their responses and finding out, whether it's helpful or harmful or not helpful, or neutral. And I'm pleased to say that it was convincing enough that it got published in the British Medical Journal. So I thought at the time, I can die now. But yeah, so one of the big reasons why we did this was to convince the funders. We have to get funding because the Life Writing Collective, we cross-subsidize people who can afford courses, help subsidize people who can't afford to pay for our courses. And we've got background costs. We have to pay the facilitators something. So, and it's hard to convince the donors that writing is helpful when there are so many other needs. So anyway, this was a feather in our cap, I think. It was the first research project in the Global South to explore the medical humanities effects of writing. So a little bit about myself, my own invisible mending, which doesn't fit any double-blind control trial at this point. I was born to be a writer. From the age of 3, I was determined to learn how to read. I had 2 older sisters, a lot of books in the house, so I insisted on reading early. And then I started writing at the age of 7. Some people have a calling, that thing that calls you. But my family channeled me into medicine, and I didn't object. I never thought of writing as a career, thank goodness, because it's still pocket money. Very few people can make a living from their writing, unless you're a journalist or. So once I started becoming a published writer and starting to track how creative writing can help us with our lives, I started collecting a whole lot of information on this. And then I got an invitation to apply for a research grant, or a grant for a nonfiction book. And I always thought of myself as a fiction writer and a poet. So I went into the trash. And then that night, this is many years ago, this is 2010. That night, I started having this download and realizing I had all this material that I could now put in one place, in one book. So I applied for the grant. I wrote Eloquent Body, which makes a case for the poetry of the body being as important as the chemical cascade and the protocol and the things that we are trained in medicine to help us. They're very elegant. It's a very elegant approach, but it does mean that we box people. We box them according to their medical history, according to the examination, the special investigations, and the diagnosis and the treatment. And it leaves out, I always felt in our medical training, it leaves out the person's story. It leaves out whether their house burnt down, or they were forcibly removed, or they died in their grandmother's arms, or they had to repeat classes at school because they got tuberculosis. And those things have huge impact on the trajectory of your life, the shape of your life. It has huge impact on the story you tell yourself about your own life. And without addressing that story, it means that many of our interventions are inadequate, in that you can give people treatment, but if they don't believe in taking pills because their mother took too many pills in her lifetime, you're not going to be addressing the problem. You're not going to convince somebody to even take the treatment. So I became more and more interested in how the narrative or the image that underlies your behavior, how that influences your life. So I've got this little joke that I sometimes bring out in courses, especially with medical students. So if you're having crushing chest pain and it's going down your left arm and into your jaw, and you're sweating and feeling nauseous and feeling short of breath, don't sit down and write a poem. You go to the emergency unit and have your myocardial infarction sorted out. But if you don't write the poem when you come home, you're missing half the information. That's the poetry of your condition, that the body is trying to say something. It's trying to express something that you're not going to get with your thinking mind. You have to get by starting with your subjective experience of what's happening to you, and then letting it flow, letting that free writing practice where one word suggests the next. We're making associations. We're using the association part of the brain in order to investigate a disturbance. And the creative process starts giving you these partial answers, which feel miraculous. Suddenly your eyes get opened, or your mind gets open to something that you didn't know, or you didn't know you knew. And that can change everything. But it only happens while you are writing. Trouble is, our minds override us and say, I know this story, why bother to write it? But we know that once we sit down and actually put it on the page, something else starts happening. What is that other thing? What is the other thing that turns around? So just to talk about Breaking Milk, which was published in the UK, so it's available in the UK. It's was published by Heloise Press with a different cover, as you can see. So that as an example, Mia's case study, I was estranged from one of my children for about 2 years. It was a very difficult time. And I knew a lot of other people who were estranged from their children, or children who were estranged from their parents. And I thought, there's something in the zeitgeist here. So I'd done everything I could to try and resolve the problem with my son. And after that, you just get anxious, you stay awake at night, you start behaving badly in the world, start trying to control things and affect things in ways that are not helpful. So this is one of the reasons why writing a novel is incredibly helpful, because you take that disturbance, you take that inquiry, and you take it to the page. It takes you out of the real trauma of that situation, which is ongoing, and allows you to explore your own the story you're telling yourself about this problem. But you give it to fictional characters, you let them run with it, and then develop the subplots that feed the central concern. There were a number of issues that fed into what I think of as the leg of the novel, a number of tributaries. Another one that I often end up writing about is the split between art and science. The split that we have with our own creativity, with our own sexuality, with that creative urge that we are so removed from and encouraged to be removed from. Give creativity away to the professionals, or undervalue it as a pastime or a hobby. I hate those words. rather than seeing it as a core, valuable resource that is inbuilt, that we are born with. I'll say more about that later. So I wrote this book, and something turned around that I didn't see coming in the book. And I knew it had turned around, but I didn't understand the full significance of it until some time afterwards. I was interviewed about the book, and the interviewer pointed out something to me that I hadn't seen in the book. And it helped me understand my own responses as a mother, which is incredibly helpful to me. And there's probably still other invisible threads putting through the book, putting through all my books that I haven't consciously understood yet. I just also want to say something about my second creative practice, which is amateur dance. I have written a book about it called Dance with Suitcase. And it's interesting to me how I can go to dance once a week. And I might be feeling disturbed, and I don't know why I'm feeling a little bit upset. I dance for an hour with a couple of friends, and by the end, I'm feeling better, and I don't know why I'm feeling better. So again, that invisible mending, that regular creative practice is unbelievably helpful. You don't have to know what happened. I think we place too much emphasis on cognition. So this is Eric Kandel, who I also quote in Eloquent Body. I came across his wonderful book, Age of Insight, where one of the many things he points out about the creative process is that there are two distinct brain processes which have evolved for the task of problem solving. The trouble is that we have given far too much emphasis or weight to the logical, rational, interpretive, analytical, right, wrong part of the mind that we use in academia, we use in research. It's a very valuable part of the brain, part of the human inquiry, but it is limited in many ways. It's part of the judgment mind. It tends to cut things up in order to explore what is true. There's another part of the brain, which is the creative part of the brain, which puts things together rather than cuts them up, which can tolerate paradox and contradiction. Is not interested in the one answer. Is not interested in cure. Is not interested in perfection or being right. It's just interested in the story and how to process the story, how to grow the story, how to let the image speak for itself. So it's taking the cognitive out of the equation and letting the story or the image surface and reveal itself, as it does in dreaming, for example. But we need both parts, because the logical, rational, interpretive mind is the editing mind, but we need it to be in a proper relationship with the creative mind. Otherwise, it becomes that inner critic that stops you, that interrupts you, that puts you down, that says, no, you're not good enough. And we have to, I think, in order to write our best writing, in order to live our best life, we need to feel safe. And that undermining critic is very destructive and leads to all sorts of behavior that's not helpful towards ourselves, towards other people, towards the planet. So I found his definition really helpful to explain that creativity is such a powerful inbuilt resource. He came up with something else in the book also, this idea of how we live, we make decisions out of this, out of the narrative, out of the images that drive our lives. So, if it is true that the story you're telling yourself or the images that propel you determine your decision-making process, the choices you make in life, and that thing, here it comes again. Oh, I'm looping around. Oh, here I've got involved with an alcoholic again, or I've bought something that I can't afford, or whatever your loop behavior is, there it comes again. What is it? That loop behavior, in theory, that underneath that is a stuck image. It's an image that's trying to show you something, but we keep on looping around. How do we let that image live? So finding out what the image is a start, and then the creative process will allow it to emerge. So because I'm interested in that, obviously, And because I'm a healthcare professional, I thought I'd write a poem about, exploring what is this thing that drives our ill health and our poor decision making around ill health. And I wrote this poem called The Consulting Room. It's also the title of my next poetry collection that's coming out hopefully next month. My editor's very busy, my publisher's very busy at the moment. And so I'll read this. What we bring, an encumbrance of weighted spaces, the body's volume, its flabs and backups, the bomb of flesh, its distress flares, and rampant blooms of delinquent cells, the stink and leak and soak of the mysterious liver with its dark, acrid ink, the glands releasing their secrets, the blood salt, the exhausted horse of the beaten heart, the rubbish bin of the distended belly, the faithful dog, reluctant child, extreme machine, terrorist, caged beast, two smoky bellows, the chug and growl of gut, the national flags of skin, all itch and burn, the sweet taboos of penis and anus, the silenced vagina, silenced, world turmoil condensed and funneled into the skull, the body vault. What we want, the calm elixir and tonic, the weightlessness of flight and support of root, movement clear as water or wind, poultice of the warm palm held against a headache or hurt flank against the panic, relief from the blind cyclical scrimmage, the sanctity of an intact and serene body, a reliquary for the sacred, the implicit lyric distilled into exquisite music, the body forged from a new holding story. So there's a problem with this poem, which I only realized afterwards, is that it implies that we know what we want and we know where we want to go. And there's that gap between where we find ourselves and where we want to go. But we know in creativity provides partial answers that are surprising. Oh, I didn't know that's what I needed. Oh, I didn't know that's where I was going. But there's a relief in that. There's that moment of, okay, wow, I didn't know that. And that's what I want to, this is actually what the talk's about. So this is a quote from a book called Triggering Town, Lectures and Essays on Poetry and Writing by Richard Hugo. He's a lecturer at a university in the States, United States of America. And he says a poem can be said to have two subjects, the initiating or triggering subject, which starts the poem or causes the poem to be written, and the real and generated subject, which the poem comes to say or mean, and which is generated or discovered in the poem during the writing. That's not quite right, he says, because it suggests that the poet recognizes the real subject. The poet might not be aware of what the real subject is, but only have some instinctive feeling that the poem is done. So, there's that feeling of, okay, the poem's come to rest, I can walk away. But the thing that the poem has discovered, there might be a feeling of, okay, something new has happened here. And it might take years before you realize what it is, if at all. But what's important, I think, is that you start off with an inquiry, some disturbance, and that you come to a place of rest. And it's not necessarily a cognitive experience. Nicholas Evans, a linguist. So just to say that I got this, once you start an inquiry, things start arriving to help you with your inquiry, amazingly. And it might be that they were all already there and you just didn't notice because you weren't looking, or you weren't being observant or being aware. But it seems to me that if you step towards yourself or a project that you are busy with, things start arriving, stepping towards you. So Jane Hirschfeld's 2024 Blaney lecture online arrived mysteriously when I was looking at this whole question of what happens in that gap between, what she calls it, the gap between emotion and cognition, that turning around thing. And she quotes Nicholas Evans who's a linguist. Now, this term comes from linguistics, mirrotivity, and that feeling of aha or eureka. We don't really have a word for it in English other than eureka or wow. Mirrotivity inhabits one of the cracks between knowing and feeling, since discovering what you didn't know until just this second, and now understand, is like feeling the sun rise on a new day. What is mirrotivity? I've never come across that word before. I don't think it's in common parlance. The core, as I looked it up, the core qualities of mirrotivity, and as I say, this is how it's used in linguistics, and there are some languages in the world that embed it in the actual language. A feeling of sudden discovery or realization clicks into place. I've always thought, when a poem clicks into place, and it's a terrible analogy. It's a wrong analogy. I still haven't got a good enough one. It's like the Rubik Cube, not that I can do a Rubik Cube, but something clicks into place and there it's done. Element of surprise, of unpreparedness, of counter expectation. I can start a book, a novel, or a poem, thinking I know where it's going to go. I think of my novel Accident, which concerns a doctor GP who's trying to save lives through allopathic medicine, what we're trained in, and her performance artist son, who is doing performances that puts his life at risk, because he says, my life is only of value if I use it to try and wake the world up to what we're doing to our bodies and to the earth. Of course, the mother is beside herself with anxiety. And I thought I knew where the novel was going to go, and it turned around when I saw it arrived stepping towards me as I stepped towards it, the wonderful documentary of Marina Abramovic's The Artist is Present. That turned the novel around, and I suddenly found out something about myself and my own mothering tendencies. New information arise, things that you didn't know. So this I have to include this, because if you've ever had anybody, some of you teach writing or creativity, people who say, oh, I'm not creative. Well, first of all, your dreams are probably the most creative things on the planet. But this is Jörg Panksepp's work. He's a neuroscientist who studied mammals, and he won the Nobel Prize for his work. He says there are 7 primary emotional command systems in the brain that you have to be born with. If you're not born with them, you will die, because you can't learn them. And these are the systems: seeking, being able to look for something, and it doesn't say what you're looking for, but you have to be able to look for something. Care or attachment. You have to be able to attach to your mummy, because you have to be able to look for her titty and attach to her so that you will survive. Play. We can't learn how to play because we play in order to learn. Interestingly, lust. We're all born lustful. Fear, panic, and anger. So the first 3 I'm really interested in terms of our creativity and curiosity. My son said to me the other day, I think the big problem in the world is that we've lost our curiosity. So this is another reason why regular creative practice is so important. It keeps our curiosity alive, rather than deciding, I know the story about me, myself, about the other person, about the world. No need to explore. Stay curious. That also interrupts the inner critic that says you can't and you won't and you shouldn't, and stay curious. So anybody who says they're not creative, you can quote his work. But that role of play is so important. That's what we're doing when we create. We're trying things out, children know how to do this. My children used to call it just pretend, jubatend. Jubatend this, take a risk here, make a mess there. See what happens. Let's see what's going to happen. I included this poem because, this thing of not necessarily understanding, coming to some resolution, but it's not a cognitive one. Archibald MacLeish, an American poet whose thing was a poem should be and not mean. There are lots of poems that I don't get, that are, they be, but they don't mean, and I can't feel them. But this poem I can feel. I don't understand it, but I can feel it. So I've included it as an example of how we don't have to understand everything in order for something to land in the body. Water is heavy silver over stone. Water is heavy silver over stone's refusal. It does not fall. It fills, it flows, every crevice, every fault of the stone, every hollow. River does not run. River presses its heavy silver self down into stone, and stone refuses. What runs, swirling and leaping into the sun, is stone's refusal of the river, not the river. I find it incredibly moving. Seems to speak, to relationship in whatever you bring to the poem. So to end with two quotes, which have been very important to me, meaningful to me, and I often use them. C.S. Lewis, who I'm sure you all know, you can't go back to the beginning and change what happened, but you can start from where you are and change the ending. Write what you know to find out what you don't know. So, Life Writing Collective, what do we mean by mending? I think for me is coming to terms with what happens to you. Coming to terms with what happens to me, terrible things happen in life. And I started off with a really good foundation. My parents had enough money. I had a really good education. I had shelter, I had food. I speak English. I'm white. This is all very helpful. It's like a leg up unfortunately, in the world. So, but there's no question that regular creative practice has helped me integrate all sorts of things in my life and understand here something about myself, my own motivations, help me step back from my impulsive behavior, the things that have not been helpful in my life. I still have to manage some of them a lot, but I have a tool where I can take the things that are disturbing to me, I can take it to a poem, I can take it to a novel, I can explore it on the page without knowing what's going to happen next. I calm myself down, very important. I also want to include here that this can look like one of the potential problems in therapy, that it can be very individualistic. It's all about me, and I'm all right, Jack, in the world. This is not intended to present like that, because I do think that it's really important for activists to understand their own motivation so that they can be more effective in the world, in their witnessing, in their interventions in the world. What is my relationship to myself, to the other, to the environment? I think you become a better witness if you explore your own thought habits, behavioral habits, as an initial activity, and then to do it in community, which is what we do in the Life Writing Collective, so that because you've got a story about somebody as soon as they've entered the room, and in my experience, I'm always wrong. It's taught me that I'm always wrong. The story I have in my head is about my upbringing, it's about my culture, it's about my previous experiences. It's got nothing to do with this person coming into the room. So stay curious, stay open, be suspicious of the story you're telling yourself, whatever it is, and find out from this person. And through writing, you can meet people in real ways if they share their work in a safe, facilitated space.
That's so great, Dawn. It's just, a wonderful presentation there, wonderful talk. And I couldn't stop you because you were just saying so many wonderful things I wanted everyone to hear. And it's so affirming to hear you, as an experienced medical doctor, see the value of this work. It's great. And I can see lots of appreciation there in the you see lots of hearts and claps coming up there, and there's lots of stuff in the chat. So we've got time for just a couple of short questions. I know Dawn is going to go into Garish's session afterwards if you have any more questions. But let's just open the floor. Just come to the screen and ask a question if you have one.
Just wondering, a quick question. Thank you. It was wonderful. And I was curious if you had thoughts on the poems that get stuck. The experience I've had sometimes with these poems of moving to the place of rest, and also of times of staying in this feeling of undoneness or stuckness. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I mean, it comes up in courses all the time. What happens if I feel blocked, that's so-called blocked? So I'm interested in what the block has to say. I mean, we see that the block is something you've got to get over and under or around or get rid of, but maybe the block has got something to say. So one thing you could try is writing the block. Where does it live in your body? Not to stay out of the cognitive and stay with the feeling of the block. What is the image of the block? And it's very individual, whether it's a wall or a hook or a hammer or and write that. That might feed into the substance of the poem. Or go back to the first time in your life that you ever felt like that feeling of this isn't working, I can't do this, it's stuck. And you might find at the age of 4 you had that feeling, and it might release something into your current inquiry if you write into that experience.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you, Tara. Anybody else with a question or a response? There are lots of responses in the chat, Dawn, which we will make sure get sent over to you to see lots of wonderful, positive responses. Okay. So I think we better wrap up. If you have any more questions, pop into Garish's session. I'm sure Garisch will be able to find some time to speak to Dawn there. So thank you, Dawn. That was absolutely amazing. And I know it's recorded, and so you will all be able to go back and listen in detail to that wonderful presentation. And Dawn is around for the rest of the day, I hope. So you'll be able to catch up with her later. Thank you so much, Dawn.
Thank you so much. Okay. Bye.